the Lennart Karl stuff, Stefan. So Bayern Munich does this thing where they do this every year, and the content that comes out of it is just gold dust for anyone who's not Bavarian, because it's one of those weird little things that Bayern Munich as a club does that is so different than any other club in the world. It's like, it's kind of, when they go to the Oktoberfest, and the content that comes out of that is always incredible. And around Christmas, when they're off, they send all their players to different fan clubs all over Bavaria, right? Which just means that a guy like Jaume Musiala, for example, has to listen to some very strong Bavarian dialect somewhere in the corner of Bavaria that has come up with a fan song for him, and not only has to listen to it but also sing it, and this of course makes its way on Instagram. Lennart Karl also went to one of those meetings, and he was asked about his favorite club. Such an innocent question, right? And he said, of course, he grew up being a Bayern Munich fan, and we know that he literally slept in Bayern Munich, pajamas, and in his bed, the stuff was all in Bayern Munich. There was posters of Bastian Schweinsteiger, Philipp Lahm, and all that kind of stuff. But then he said, well, one day, I'm 17 years old. Maybe I want to go abroad, and Real Madrid is another club that is on my mind. And, a small little throwaway comment made by a 17-year-old who doesn't want to spend the rest of his life in one country was made into a massive story. I think Fabrizio Romano even did like a Bayern Munich Real Madrid transfer post on this. Before we jump into it and discuss this a bit more, there's one thing that I hate about this. For many years now, we have tried to polish these professional players into saying absolutely nothing. They have to be politically correct to the extent where when we have them in the mixed zone, we get absolutely nothing from them that is interesting. There's been very few exceptions, of course. Thomas Müller is one who to this day is an absolute quote machine, delivers interesting anecdotes, tells his mind, right? He's one of the few players who does this. Joshua Kimmich is another. But they become rarer and rarer. And the reason why they become rarer and rarer is because when they do say something that is interesting and is maybe something that a real person would say, they get blasted for it. And this is, in my opinion, the perfect example here.
Yeah, for sure. It's an interesting tale in, internet culture, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I took a lot of glee in kind of scrolling through the Bayern Reddit forums and seeing how they react to this stuff. And then, there's comments in the actual Bundesliga forum, and, obviously all the other fans of other clubs were saying, oh, well, taste of your own medicine for a change, since every other player at every other club in the country often either doesn't say it outright or is assumed that, they love playing for Dortmund or Gladbach or Haasfeld, but they've always dreamed of playing for Bayern Munich, because that's why more or less every player in Germany does that. And suddenly, it's not fun when the shoe's on the other foot. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think first and foremost, I think it's refreshing for Lennart Karl to kind of speak his mind, to be open and honest about that. It reminded me of Florian Wirtz saying that he was a Barcelona fan, and then like a few years later having to work it back and saying, oh, well, I didn't really quite say it, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's like, who cares? These kids are kids. They grew up supporting certain clubs. Most kids these days have a favorite club in each country anyway. I mean, I know I did. I always had a preference for one club in any country, so it's not like he supports Bayern or Real Madrid. He can quite easily, as a kid, support both, because most kids around the world do support, a lot of kids around the world do support Bayern and Real Madrid, which, probably comes as a shock to actual Bayern Munich fans, season ticket holders at Allianz Arena and things like that. But it's... I just think it's been completely overblown. It's been completely overblown by fans, and I think Max Eberl came out and made a really good comment, actually. And this is, I think, where Eberl's kind of earns his wages, I think, because I think he's often a very good speaker on things like this. He's very good at coming out and talking about sensitive topics, very good at talking about youth players and then developing his people. And he came out and said, look, Lennart Karl came to us, he said sorry, he didn't expect us to blow up the way it did. and we're just getting on with it. And he's like, we're not worried. He's not worried. No one else should be worried, and absolutely no one should be worried. It's not as if he's making a transfer request to go play for Real Madrid anytime soon. But Manu, it obviously touches a nerve, doesn't it? I mean, there's no this just wouldn't upset Bayern fans if it didn't touch a nerve, and you can understand why it does, because throughout their history, at least very recent history, Real Madrid have poached their best players at times.
Or tried.
Or at least tried, yeah. David Alaba, Toni Kroos, and then of course, I know it's not Real Madrid, but they've just kind of gone through the whole situation with Lewandowski when he was kind of batting his eyelids at Barcelona for year after year after year, and eventually got that move. And I think Bayern fans, and I think most of them do appreciate this, the situation that Bayern are in and their dominance of the Bundesliga means that football players who, even if they grow up wanting to support Bayern Munich, to play for Bayern Munich their whole life, will, and if they do, will eventually want to try new things. Because the fact of the matter is that you win everything with Bayern every single season. That can get quite boring, especially for you got to remember, these guys are very ambitious athletes. They want to play at the very highest level. They want to test themselves at the very highest level. And there's only so many Bundesliga league titles you can win year after year after year before you think, I want to try something different. Now, of course, the Champions League offers that kind of, that test against the very best. And that's why a lot of players, and that's why Bayern do have their appeal. Players don't come to Bayern Munich to win Bundesliga titles. Typically, they come to Bayern Munich to win and to challenge the Champions League. Obviously, winning the Bundesliga is a huge thing too, but it's the Champions League. And you do find that players who have then won the Champions League with Bayern, that's when they typically say, right, I want to go to Real Madrid, I want to go to the Premier League, etc., etc. I mean, you can go all the way back to like Michael Ballack and guys like that as well, can't you, Manu?
Well, I mean, just to give my 50 cents to that as well. When I was 17, I didn't want to. I just graduated high school here in Canada. After moving here as 17 I moved here when I was 17, and a year later I graduated high school. And I didn't want to spend the rest of my life here. I went to do my PhD in London, and before that, lived in the Netherlands. When you're a young person, you want to see the world. You can't expect a 17-year-old who's also Bavarian. Like he grew up in Bavaria, right? Like you can't expect a 17-year-old to spend the rest of his life just living in one place. Kids are more ambitious than that. And so I don't fault him for wanting to see the world. I mean, Thomas Müller recently, to mention him again, recently spoke about that with his experience in Canada and how important that's been for him. Having been only in one place for this long. Bastian Schweinsteiger did the same when he went to Man United. You mentioned David Alaba. He was at Bayern Munich for 13 years before he moved on to Real Madrid. I think there is, from a personal development standpoint, this doesn't mean that they dislike Munich or that they don't think Bayern Munich is a big club. But these are also people that when they look back on their careers, like, oh yeah, I spent 20 years playing for one club. For some people, that's appealing, but for a lot of people, it's not. And, from a personal development standpoint, I don't know many people who find it appealing to be in one company for their entire life. It's the same thing. Like if you look at your own, if you're a fan of this club and you look at your own personal development, wouldn't you want the same for yourself? And also the thing is too, Lennart Karl and his entire family and where they're from, I think one of the things that is very refreshing is that he is so outspoken. He has this personal feud going on with Mario Basler. Mario Basler thinks he is not a quality player and will never be a top star. And, he's basically said this when Lennart Karl was still in the academy, and turned out he was wrong. So now he's doubling down because he's Mario Basler. So some of the celebrations that Lennart Karl has been doing has been towards Mario Basler. And Mario Basler, by the way, one of the last of the very outspoken players with a really strong personality, like him or dislike him, fine. But, at least he was one of those people who had real character. And Lennart Karl seems to really play into that. And I think one of the worst things that can happen here is that if we rob a player like Lennart Karl, who seems to be not only an enormous talent, but also has a really strong personality and speaks his mind, the last thing we want to do is rob him of that, because it actually could probably also take away from the way he plays football. this really creative aspects that he has, right? The way he handles the ball, the way he handles situations. You see it with his celebrations. He can play like this and face this kind of pressure at such a young age because he has this personality. And the last thing we want is rob a player like that of his personality. So unfortunately, if you're a Bayern Munich fan and you enjoy the way he's playing, it comes with that. You can't put that away or take that away, and neither should we. And I received one comment. It's like, oh, you only like this because you're a journalist and you like the quotes. We should all like this. Football's entertainment.
Yeah. I think, and you're absolutely spot on. And I think we kind of both agree on this. I think most fans do as well. And I think just to kind of maybe wrap it up and just kind of add a final thing to it, it's just like, I think club allegiances and like personal fandoms and things like that, they can play a part sometimes in football, but I think more often than not, players are often at the whim of, the clubs and the circumstances they're in, the agents, what they want. And like I said, they're all ambitious young men and they want to test themselves. So, Lennart Karl could say, I want to play for Real Madrid one day, but circumstances in his career might mean that he stays at Bayern Munich his entire career and wins, 4 Champions Leagues. Equally, Jamal Musiala could be the perfect Boy Scout and say, Bayern Munich's the only club for me. I don't want to play for any other club. And then one day turn around and say, actually, I want to go to Barcelona because I've won the Champions League with Bayern. I've done everything I can here. I want to move. None of these things, whether these guys support Bayern Munich or not, really doesn't come into the question. So I think the idea of us like trying to kind of predict if and when Lennart Karl is going to turn around and say, I'm leaving for Real Madrid, I'm on Tony Cruz 2.0, it's just impossible. It's like you're reading the tea leaves to some extent. And more often than not, when these guys do leave, it's because maybe the club undervalued them, in the case of Tony Cruz, for example, or they simply didn't need them anymore. And Bayern are obviously a very, very well run club. They have tremendous resources to persuade players to stay put, not to mention the prospect of challenging for every trophy every year. So I think I wouldn't be losing any sleep over this if I was a Bayern Munich fan. Not just the prospect of Lennart Karl leaving, but also just getting worked up about him saying he wants to play for Real Madrid one day. If anything, it shows his ambition, and I think that's encouraging.
Well, and immediately, like, he's going to sign a new contract now, right? Like the on his 18th birthday, the current contract he's on that runs until 2026 will be automatically extended to 2029. Bayern Munich are currently working and putting the final touches on a new deal that will see him at the club until 2031. So until the year 2031, I think Bayern Munich's fans can sleep in peace. When it comes to Lennart Karl, that's a long time from now, that is an entire World Cup cycle away, and a lot of things can happen until then. So, I mean, this is I think the news that a lot of people have been waiting for. So Lennart Karl, signing a new contract. His salary is expected to go from the 2 million euros that have been agreed on in his initial 2029 contract to 5 to 7 million euros until 2031. That's also really good for Bayern Munich, I think. If he continues to develop on the current trajectory, that 5 to 7 million euro deal will be a bargain, Stefan.
Yeah, exactly. And it's up to Bayern Munich to keep these guys interested. I mean, we've talked about Jamal Musiala quite a lot, and how it's up to Bayern to keep him interested in staying at Bayern Munich. And I know Bayern Munich fans would say, well, why the hell is that up to Bayern? Well, it is. These guys, if these guys are going to be world-class players, it's up to Bayern to prove to be a club that world-class players want to play for, which is by challenging for the Champions League every year. And, without kind of derailing this and turning it into some sort of like speculation over Jamal Musiala's future, we've always said he'll only stay at Bayern for as long as they're contenders for the Champions League, because that's how good a player he is. So, if they want to keep Lennart Karl, they have to do something similar.